Hey, good day, everybody, and welcome to Rocky Mountain Readings, where we've been reading the wonderful work, Tevunot, Knowing God's Plan, or The Knowing Heart. And I think yesterday was quite profound as we saw Ramkal's explanation for why bad things happen to good people or vice versa, and his unique solution that he said was hidden for numerous generations. He gives the notion of two accounts from heaven being utilized. The standard one of reward and punishment that everyone tends to think of. But then he also talks about a more transcendent and often unreadable the Mazal account. And this is where Hashem, could put in, just the right blessing that allows one to succeed versus another in all things being equal, or vice versa. Hashem, though, guides it all in his purposes, and Ramkel's explanation of this is very profound, but it also helps us understand more of what this mazal is that we started we're exposed to with the Jewish Guide to the Mysterious. But to understand that Hashem is in complete and utter control over all things is a profound thought nonetheless, and we need to grip and grasp that and to contemplate, when you're in prayer, what you're looking for. And sometimes it's just that little bit of blessing that a project or an effort that you're putting forth is successful. And, we all wish that our works be fruitful rather than just numerous. We try. Now, I did hear yesterday from Bina Kozuch, who's the author of Triumph After All, which is a Holocaust story. I think she's talking about her mother's experiences from the Holocaust, and she is willing to come on the show, and I'll be talking more with her about it next week. And she did mail me a hard copy, which, me being up here in the Canadian Rockies, is I don't get mail or shipments as quick as maybe some major metropolitan areas. So I don't know if I'll have that on time to start Monday. So we may do some interim shares. If anybody's got any suggestions they want to see in the short term while I'm waiting for that book to come, I mean, I can always download the Kindle edition and start reading from there, and then jump into the paper copy once it arrives. But I got to tee up more and talk with her more next week. But that's exciting. I mean, it might be a fresh break from us to jump away from some serious study and into an honest story. I mean, I'm sure there's many of them about the Holocaust. I just love to promote authors that maybe struggling or they've taken the time out of their life. It meant so much to them to share. It's just a joy to share their work as well. And we hope that it encourages them to continue and refine their craft. And who knows, some people write 3, 4, 5 books before one becomes quite successful. And, it all plays into the mix. But we want to encourage that sort of fruitfulness and, even play a role in sharing that mazal that Hashem pours down on us. I'm so thankful to the Noahide World Center that I get the opportunity to broadcast here on the Noahide World Center social media pages, and also on our international Noahide network, trying to keep that up and still focus on growing that. We're hoping that the messages get out there and the beauty of Torah sinks in the minds of people, and they realize that the Hebrew people have been, correct all along. The rabbis have known and been doing exactly what Hashem has called of them to do, and and that we embrace, that message that is trying to fulfill that tikkun olam, that making the world a better place. And yeah, so it's always exciting. So to be a part of something great and grand. For those of you that are just joining us, we're doing this Tevunot series from Torah.org under the Ramkel section. I've put the link in the YouTube page, and we're down in the Knowing Heart today. We're on the end of this series. Tevunot's down at the bottom, and we're on section 7 today, and I think we should be able to finish it no problem. Hopefully, you folks are enjoying this, and you're getting some tidbits of Torah truth out of it. I think Rabbi Yaakov Feldman, who put the series out there, he's described it as an intermediate level. It's definitely because it's got preconceived concepts that if you're a beginner, you may have never been exposed to, and you might need to understand some Hebrew definitions. But it's beautiful work, and I think Rabbi Yaakov Feldman does a wonderful job at explaining it in an easy enough to digest manner. So hopefully it's working for you, and please give me some feedback, folks. I appreciate all the feedback, and if there's any topic or something you want me to go into next week while I'm waiting for this wonderful book to arrive from the author. Anyways, okay, we finally arrived at the very last section of Da'at Tevunot, which explains prophecy. Huge. It seems to be something of an addendum to the work, though, rather than an expansion on it. In fact, the soul, which poses all the questions in this work, if you'll recall from Ramkel's introduction, as opposed to reason, which responds to it, seems to indicate that it said, there's one more thing I want to ask you about, which isn't perhaps as lengthy as the others, or might not be as challenging or as important to know about as they, but it's something that calls for explanation nonetheless. The whole idea of prophecy. For as we pointed out in the introduction, the soul said there that he wanted clarification about some things about the Jewish faith. For while there are certainly several specific matters of the faith that we're to hold by if we're to be true to our Torah ideals, yet still in all, some of them are straightforward enough while others simply aren't. So he asked for help when it came to them specifically. What he wanted to have discussed were divine providence, reward and punishment, the coming of Messiah, and the resurrection of the dead, and that in fact comprised all of what we've included until now. There were certain other things that the soul felt he didn't quite need clarity on, like the fact of God's existence as well as his oneness, eternality, non-physical makeup, the idea that everything that exists derived out of sheer nothingness, the reality of prophecy and the uniqueness of Moses' prophecy, the subject at hand, and the ideas that the Torah we now have is from Hashem himself, eternal, and is the very one revealed to us at Mount Sinai. While he'd apparently found them easy enough to grasp then, he somehow changed his mind at this point, since he asked for some elucidation about prophecy also. Now, that's not to belittle the wonder and profundity of the idea that Hashem Almighty communes with some select souls and reveals his wishes and intentions to them. The very idea of it is heaven and earth shattering. But the point at hand is that prophecy isn't fundamentally important for our own understanding of Hashem's interactions with the world and of what's expected of us accordingly, which comprises the main thrust in this work. That having been said, Ramkel then goes on to grant us a lot of insight into prophecy here, as we'll see. Beautiful topic. So let's hope we get into a little bit more. I think this ties in with what we read in the 8 chapters of the Rambam, how the prophets sought piety first. But let's go on to see what Ramkel has to say. Prophecy, Ramkel declares, is the knowledge and comprehension of Hashem's glory that he grants the prophets. i.e., it is the clearest and deepest understanding of Hashem's ways in the world that a human being could ever hope to achieve. But let's make it clear that prophecy grants one a profound understanding of Hashem's interactions with the world, to be sure, but not an understanding of his very being, as that's simply unfathomable to even the greatest of prophets. In a way, we're being told that while the prophets were privy to Hashem's actions, mechanisms, demands, preferences, and expectations, to his displays of satisfaction or dissatisfaction, which is to say, to his manifestations of mercy, judgments, and of life, well-being, as well as the other traits attributed to him, still in all, no prophets were privy to Hashem's heart, if you will, or his private ruminations, which are out of bounds. In other words, they could see him at work, if you will, but never at home. That's not to deny that they could actually envision Hashem's complex and variegated influences upon the world and the principles upon which they're based, for they could. And it's also not meant to deny the fact that they could grasp the past along with all of its implications, as well as the future with all of its promises based on that. They could grasp all that too. After all, they were acutely aware of all the forces at play all along, and by thus focusing upon them, they can or understand how those forces played themselves out in the course of time, broadly and deeply, within and without. Thus their reach was vast and profound, and was grounded in Hashem's intentions for the universe, but he himself was beyond their understanding. Interesting. All right. Section 7, Chapter 3. Just what did the prophets see and know? As one of them put it, Hashem spoke to the prophets and also gave them many visions and related parables through them, from Hosea 12:11, in the course of dreams and while they were awake. That's to say that the prophets were granted visions that served as images, metaphors, similes, symbols, or representations of Hashem's ways in the world. The exception to that was the prophecy of Moses, the greatest prophet of all, to whom Hashem spoke mouth to mouth, in a vision of literal truth, not in riddles, from Numbers 12:8. But the visions that the prophets had weren't the products of rigorous intellectual insights of profound reckoning. Their insights came to them from up above rather than from deep within, and they understood that what was granted them was a sure and doubtless revelation rather than something that could be argued with or countered. I don't know, in this day and age, everybody's arguing about everything. You see it on social media. For not only did they receive figures of speech that would express what they needed to say to the people, they were also granted sure insight into its meaning and significance, and into the fact that it was something that Hashem himself wanted to pass along. Understand, though, that the prophets were privy to different sorts of images overall, those that depicted various aspects of Hashem's personality in the world, if you will, and those that depicted his actions. There would be times, for example, when Hashem wanted to express his beneficence and mercy to a prophet, so he'd seem to appear as a kindly elder, see Daniel 6:9. And other times he wanted to express his might against those who would seem to thwart his wishes, so he'd appear as a warrior, see Mekilta Yitro 22, also see Chagiga 14a for both examples. Examples of images that speak to his actions in the world, which were often arcane and perplexing, include Jeremiah's almond staff from Jeremiah 1:11 and the boiling pot from Jeremiah 1:13, or Jacob's ladder from Genesis 28:12, or Ezekiel's scroll from Ezekiel 3:1, Zechariah's measuring basket from Zechariah 5:6, as well as his golden menorah lamp from Zechariah 4:2, etc. The important and underlying message behind these sorts of images weren't obvious to the prophet at first any more than they were to the others who experienced it, but Hashem soon clarified them. Interesting. Section 7, Chapter 4. Few things rankle the human heart more than contradictions. Truth be known, and while most of us have learned to accept ambiguity and fuzziness by the time we become adults, we'd actually much prefer that our reality be neat, clean, and smooth. But it's very often not, and that's especially true of messages from heaven. For as we pointed out already, only Moses received blunt and straightforward responses from Hashem, while the other prophets simply didn't. In fact, as Ramchal points out, their visions were sometimes polar opposites of each other at one and the same moment. And so Hashem would seem to appear angry, mild-mannered, jovial, and more at any particular moment to a prophet. And he says, see Sophorim 16.2 and Yelkut Shimoni, Yitro 286. All right, for other examples or other such things. How can that be? It's because their visions weren't of the things themselves, Ramchal explains, but were specifically prophetic visions, figurative rather than literal images of what was going on. That depended on Hashem's designs at the time. The point is that those visions need not have fallen under any law of reality or of nature whatsoever, including those of the sort of logic and consistency we're used to. For at bottom, each vision was meant to express something about Hashem's otherwise inscrutable ways in the world. And if that called for contradiction or the like, then so be it. But don't think it ends there. There are other daunting things about the prophet's insights, as we'll see. This whole issue is puzzling, as any astute reader could point out, we've been taught that no one saw an image of any sort on the day that Hashem spoke on Mount Sinai. From Deuteronomy 4:15, they saw no form. So how could anyone, even a prophet, claim to be subject to visions? In fact, there are a couple of other contradictions when it comes to this. Didn't we already cite the verse that indicated that God spoke to Moses face to face and that he saw Hashem as he is in Numbers 12:8, which would confirm the idea of visions along the same lines? Didn't Ezekiel report in the course of his great and terrifying vision of the heavens that on his throne high above was a figure whose appearance resembled a man? From Ezekiel 1:26. Yet weren't we told, to whom or what then can you liken me, says the Holy One, from Isaiah 40, verse 25, as well as with whom or what then will you compare Hashem? To what image will you liken him, from Isaiah 40:18, which would then deny the idea of seeing things that represent Hashem's presence. What then did the prophets envision, and what did they derive from what they were allowed to see? You certainly couldn't say that Hashem had the prophets sin by seeing things they weren't permitted to. What Hashem did to the prophet, according to Ramchal, was to make him wise and to set him upon the truth. That is, Hashem saw to it that each prophet would grasp the truth of what he was actually observing, and that he would know the limitations of his visions. For as we explained already, prophetic insight was unlike any other sort of insight in the natural world, as the prophet fully understood the unquestionable, deep intent behind everything he was privileged to see. And he knew for a fact and without question that it was Hashem himself or one of his appointed angels who was revealing something to him, that he was being granted important information, and most importantly for our purposes, that the prophet wasn't to stare head on upon what he was being allowed to see, either literally or figuratively. That's to say, not only wasn't he allowed to peer upon what he was seeing, he also wasn't allowed to ruminate upon it too long in his mind. In other words, he had to accept it for what it was. For what he was privy to was a prophetic glimpse into truth, the truth of things put symbolically, that had the power to reveal something that needed to be known, but could easily be misunderstood. And the prophet was also made to know that he wasn't seeing Hashem himself, which is simply impossible, but rather that he was being granted a quick, short-lived image that Hashem wanted him to see just then, that represented his will and intentions for humankind. All right, section 7, chapter 6. But make no mistake about it, those prophetic visions weren't what we'd term figments of the imagination or any sort of curious visual ruminations. And they certainly weren't hallucinations. Prophets weren't shamans, wizards, or what is termed intuitives. They were especially righteous, gifted, holy, and specifically chosen rare individuals who were trained by elder prophets when the prophets were young and were granted manifestly given God-given skills. And that's, see, he'll quote Yesodai HaTorah, chapter 7. As such, they knew very well that they were seeing fresh manifestations of Hashem's glory that was brought about just for them, as Ramkel put it, that would enable them to comprehend a revelation of Hashem's presence. That is, they knew their visions were granted by Hashem himself of his own intentions and concerns, and they never doubted its veracity. Ramkel then offers a very homespun analogy so that we might understand their revelations and how convinced they were of its authenticity. We're asked to imagine seeing your friend through a glass window, someone you know well. Even though your friend himself would be behind a glass, you wouldn't be seeing him straight on. You'd nonetheless be certain that you'd be seeing that friend, since you wouldn't confuse him for anyone else. In fact, even if you were to imagine that the glass were to be transformed somehow, that is, even if it was somehow misshapen or colored over so that your friend behind it would appear different than he was, as a result, still in all, you'd undoubtedly know that it was your friend himself whom you were looking at behind the glass, since you were so familiar with him, and you'd quickly realize that while his image was being affected by the glass, he was still himself. So too, when a prophet would see an image of Hashem before his eyes, Ramkel concludes, he would know for certain that it was Hashem himself hidden behind that image, since Hashem was so familiar to the prophet. And even though he would appear behind a glass, an impediment in the form of an inner and striking image that Hashem had formed within him, the prophet would know that it would still be him right there and then. Be no misunderstanding. All right. Section 7, chapter 7. Though Moses also saw images and likewise knew that they weren't of Hashem himself, like the other prophets, his level of prophecy was still in all of an entirely different and more sublime order than theirs. We'd cited this before, but Ramkel is most explicit about it here. The other prophets weren't able to fully look upon the images they saw. They could only glance at it or scan it quickly, and never in depth, as he indicates. That's because they were looking as if from behind a wall or through several lenses. As such, their visions lacked clarity, but Moses' vision was far, far clearer. As some sages put it, while the other prophets saw what they did through 9 lenses, Moses saw through 1. And as others said, while the other prophets saw what they did through stained lenses, Moses saw through clear glass. Shalom, Sheila. Vayikra Rabbah 1:14. It's as if the other prophets saw something after having rubbed their eyes hard in wonderment, which smudged the image, while Moses saw what he did after having stared in stark amazement, which only slightly compromised the image. Those other prophets couldn't quite make out what they were looking at and couldn't quite grasp it thoroughly. As such, even their understandings of its importance were affected. One really couldn't have expected otherwise, though, as Ramkel makes the point, since the images they were granted were only meant to express general notions rather than specific injunctions or the like. Compare, for example, Ezekiel's inexact warnings about idol worshiping that was going on in his time with Moses' specific prohibitions against idol worshiping and the like. So they had a somewhat vague idea of what they were being told. Moses, on the other hand, had a clear, crisp understanding, as clear as any created entity could have, and he thus attained the very highest degree of communication from Hashem. Here's another way Ramkel proposes we look at it. We're not suggesting that the prophets merely saw things with their eyes, which would mean, of course, that their visions would be affected by their being long or short-sighted, and that would be what would set one against the other. They experienced spiritual visions, as Ramkel terms it. That didn't depend on either their own physical conditions or their own surroundings. And since each of them was unique, each prophet had a unique spiritual vantage point from which to see. Now, a spiritual vision would allow one to see into all sorts of things he wouldn't ordinarily be able to. One could see what lies inside a barrel, for example, or see through a wall, thanks to prophetic vision, which he could never do otherwise. Ramkel remarks, that explains the variations of their visions and how one of them was able to see the image of a lion or an eagle when there wasn't one actually there at the time, from Ezekiel 10:14. The point is that if the other prophets were able to see such wondrous things thanks to their spiritual visions, despite their limited scope, one could only imagine the depth of the perception that Moses' images and messages entailed. An obvious question that needs to be asked is, what exactly was the point of prophets being shown images? Why didn't God simply tell his prophets right out what he wanted them to pass along to the Jewish nation? On one level, it comes to this, Ramkel says. Hashem wanted to reveal things to people in human terms. That is, in ways that would be understood by all, not just the most sophisticated of us, and in ways that would touch us emotionally. And since people would best see, i.e., understand the celestial influences and Hashem's generous ways by means of the images that the prophets told them about, he granted them just those sorts of depictions, since they would exemplify the message being sent. That's to say, if Hashem would have had his prophets simply report that he loves us and is bounteously generous, the best of us would accept that at face value and be moved to change. But most of us simply don't function that way. We need to be stunned into action and are thus best moved by dramatic images which artists, writers, and advertisers know only too well. So we'd be far more affected by being told about a fountain or a wellspring in heaven that would gush forth fresh water, for example, than by a statement of divine love and effulgence. So Hashem translated his influences and ways into mundane images that stand for and symbolize his ways, since that's what would work best, but that's just one explanation. Ramkel says it's also true that the very way that Hashem chose to translate his influences into mundane terms affects our very existence and makeup, and he offers examples of that. Hashem chose to grant us actual eyes so as to have us understand that Hashem observes us. That explains why the Torah often speaks of Hashem's eyes, as in, and Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. from Genesis 6:8. And his eyes are on the ways of mortals, and he sees their every step from Job 34:21. Along the same lines, Hashem saw to it that our eyes would be comprised of different shades and hues to illustrate the subtly various ways he governs us. As such, the whites of our eyes represent Hashem's graciousness, the dark represents his judgment, and the more colorful band represents the more nuanced combinations of graciousness and judgment. The same is true of the content and quality of all things in this world, as well as their taking one form under one circumstance and another in another. He adds, they're all beholden upon Hashem's decisions to translate transcendent matters into mundane phenomena. Shalom in India, Ramesh. As such, this principle is a major source of human reality, and it helps to explain, for example, why we're comprised of left, right, and center aspects, why we stand on 2 feet, have double limbs and organs for the most part, and it goes a long way toward explaining everything else about our physical makeup, to say nothing of our spiritual makeup. It's all there to express cosmic truths. So rather than the opinion that the sages drew examples from our physiology to explain heaven, the truth of the matter is now clear. It's that our physiology explains things about heaven. Huge concepts. All right, section 7, chapter 9. The prophets saw various grades of light, ascending or descending. Ramkel continues, moving along or standing still and the like, much as we'd see physical phenomenon moving about in our realm. But it must be understood that theirs was a supernatural rather than an ordinary vision. And the overarching point is that they were able to discern and conceive of Hashem's provisions for and management of the universe based on the makeup of those visions. So, for example, Ramkel went on to illustrate, when the prophet saw a circular encompassing image, one without discernible left or right sides, or top or bottom, that represented the way Hashem interacts with the world in general and in broad terms. But when they saw a linear image with various dimensions and subdivisions, unlike the more amorphous image above, that represented Hashem's specific interactions with the world based on a person or nation's spiritual standing, place, and time, etc. But let's explain. Hashem has 2 different ways of interacting with the universe, either in broad terms or in quite specific and tailored to terms. That's to say that he oversees and interacts with creation in total, in general, and lays out broad rules, overall goals, with general expectations and universal concerns. In those instances, Hashem sees to it that the universe as a whole moves along like a mighty ocean, with all the order, roar, and rush inherent to it, and with a rhythm of its own, but with no specific concern for details. In other instances, he concerns himself with each and every detail, as if dipping a finger in a small bowl of soup and accounting for the way each ingredient moves the other and is itself moved, changed, and reconstituted in the process. This latter style depicts the way Hashem interacts with humankind most especially, when he takes our moral or immoral actions with each other into account with a keen and discerning eye for details. That principle explains a lot. So, for example, when Hashem wanted to illustrate to his prophets his great capacity to affect and interact with all creation in an all-encompassing manner, in a way that affects everyone and everything equally, and with no one overlooked or unaccounted for, Ramkel explains, he has it appeared as if a light from his being surrounds all of creation with much the way the sky covers everything. Alluded to by the statement that spread out above the heads of the Chayot angels was what looked like an expanse, sparkling like ice, and awesome, from Ezekiel 1:22. When he wanted to illustrate his function as a judge, he had himself appear as a king sitting in judgment upon a throne, with charity on his right side and judgment on his left. When he wanted to illustrate to his prophets the variety of his capacity to contend with the world layer upon layer, that was illustrated by the Talmudic dictum, "What does the earth stand upon? Upon the foundations. And what do the foundations stand upon? Upon the waters. And all of them stand upon Hashem's arms," i.e., shoulders, from Hagigah 12b, as if Hashem stood at the core of it all, bearing it all. When he wants to illustrate how everything unfolds in an orderly and planned manner, step by step, he has a ladder appear with rungs leading down to the world. When he wants to illustrate how certain individuals are closer to him while others are more distant from him in relative order, he'll produce the image of levels lying within other levels, like inner and outer chambers, or like one piece of clothing covering another, and the like. All of this was to allow his prophets and their listeners to understand Hashem's ways in the world. Pretty profound stuff, folks. We're making good time today. Section 7, Chapter 10. Few things addle the human mind more than too much information coming through too quickly, to say nothing of contradictory information. The mind tends to shut itself off then, like a circuit that locks down rather than burn out. That being so, it's even more extraordinary to learn that all the images that the prophets saw appeared to them in one fell swoop, even the ones that contradicted each other, and that they were able to bear it all. After all, wasn't Moshe told, and didn't he envision the facts that one was not to have relations with his brother's wife, Leviticus 18:16, and yet wasn't he also told and allowed to envision that if brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, her husband's brother shall take her and marry her, from Deuteronomy 25:5. And that seems to be contradictory, which seems to contradict that. And wasn't he told and made to see at one and the same time that we're to remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, from Exodus 28, while also be shown that we're to observe the Sabbath day, Deuteronomy 5:12, implying two completely different notions? How could Moses endure these inerrant contradictions? The answer, as Ramchal explains it, lies in the fact that something that's supernatural doesn't experience the limitations of the natural world. That's to say, while contradictions and the like may aidle the human mind, they don't have that effect upon a mind that's gifted with prophecy, which transcends the way of the natural world. Ramchal then offers the example of dreams, which evince a trace of prophecy, from Barakot 57b. After all, things we see when we dream often go against the natural course of events. All kinds of contradictory phenomena toggle back and forth across the screen of the sleeping mind then. And if that's true and not unexpected in dreams, it's all the more so true of prophetic states. And our very last one. Section 7, Chapter 11. Though they were privileged to observe so much about the workings of this world, there were a couple of especially stunning and fundamental phenomena that the prophets nonetheless couldn't observe: the act of creation and the reality of the world to come. We discussed the world to come a number of times before in this work, so we'll now offer Ramchal's view on the issue of creation, ex nihilo, the fact that God had everything derive out of sheer nothingness. This, in fact, is the last subject of Tevunot in its final chapter. There are a number of befuddling things to consider when it comes to this, though. Let's begin with what we'll never know: how God created the world, i.e., his process. That's utterly beyond us. After all, he would have used pre creation processes and means which, by definition, are beyond our realm and experience. All we can begin to know is what he worked on and in what order. Ramkel offers, since both the phenomena involved in the order in which they came about were all post creational. That having been said, he then offers that the actual substance that Hashem created was utterly and fundamentally new. That raises a thorny question, though. Doesn't the fact that something utterly new came about indicate a change in Hashem's mind, so to speak? Doesn't it suggest that while at one point Hashem only allowed for pre creation, but he then decided to turn the corner and allow for post creational matter? But we're told that Hashem is not human, so he does not change his mind, from Numbers 23:19. Ramkal's response is that Hashem didn't change his mind whatsoever. He always had it in mind to create the cosmos, but he only actually brought it about at the point when he decided to. Thus, creation existed before creation in concept, but it didn't come into play until Hashem decided it would and set the process in gear, if you will. As to the ordering of things, which we can grasp, and this is why I try to share Genesis 1 a little more uniquely. Ramkel cites that their ordering of things are we're permitted to grasp. Ramkel offers that the first gears that Hashem set in place were decidedly sublime and beyond our understanding, but that the downward chain of them that came into play one after the other were less and less sublime and more along the lines of processes we could understand. It's just like gas is solidifying. They're termed his emanations, and they are the means by which Hashem interacts with the universe, which we discussed in great detail in this work. And I think there's a couple of processes that people take when they look at creation and the Kabbalistic view of emanations of the Sephirot. They're all spiritual notions, but how does things materialize? There's lots of debate and argument. I think intellectual virtue stays with the measurable and always maintains a single standard and legitimate standard of measurement without dual measurement. I find there are those spiritual minded that want to interject dual standards of measurement. And I've kind of brought that up before rabbis before. It's very, very difficult when you're dealing with the unknown. But I do hold that through Ramkal's teachings that we can grasp the order of things in early Genesis. And I find that when it says in the beginning, he created the heavens and the earth, that included the sun, moon, and stars. But it says the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, meaning when there's darkness over the face of the deep, the vantage point from the primordial earth would not have had visualization of the celestial. And then Hashem said, let there be light. And I hold clearly that that is the soft collision between the earth and the moon, and that it happened in such a fashion as to stamp what in the following day would be the dry land formation. And then after that, you have the formation of the firmament, which became the atmospherics, the forming of the atmospherics, which allowed for the visibility of the celestial on the fourth day. Before that, you would have had, gas-covered black, skies that couldn't see anything from the vantage point of the Earth. I don't see the dichotomy in the scientific measurable data and the early Genesis. I just don't see it, and I see that there are mystics that would try to, go poof, and I find that it's such a they don't realize what they're saying about Hashem when they say that. They're putting the tick tock of a clock over top of Hashem, and you cannot do that. And I don't see the sages ever permitting such a, though he's shown as being affected deeply, somewhat emotionally, with the attitude of man, but I don't see a problem with the tangible, scientific, measurable evidence and early Genesis. Those that demand ethereal, arcane visions are usually motivated with some agenda, and I don't know. I just I think maybe it's the way I'm wired. Rabbi Goldberg's always tried to be clear in a lot of things, but I'm thankful that we are continuing in the book of Genesis with Rabbi Goldberg on Sundays. It's always a joy to hear it as it's been passed down to them, but I still find there's difficulties because humanity doesn't want to accept certain things, but they will, I find, accept things that are intellectually flawed, and you can't go wrong hanging on to the garment of a rabbi and let him communicate with you in the sense that he will try to get across to you the honest and legitimate intent. And I think that Rabbi Feldman in this series has done a wonderful job trying to give us a glimpse of what Ramchal was trying to teach in Da'at Tevunot. It's considered a great work, and I think if we read it right from the book itself, it might fly way over our heads in a lot of concepts. I'm sure that many rabbinical students have gone through this over the last several hundred years, this work in its profound original Hebrew, and argued back and forth on many points. But Ramchal offers some unique insights, and he's known for his ways of dissecting problems and categorizing them in ways that are decipherable for us. And I love the Ramchal's material, and we have. I'm probably going to have a few days next week with waiting still for this other book to show up. I wonder if you're ever interested. You can look up this link that I've put there, and you can get into the way of God and how Ramchal discusses the fundamental principles of reality from the Creator, the purpose of creation, humankind, man standing in the world and the specific ways available to him, the different realms in their specific situations. Then he gets into divine providence. That's a very profound section where he gets into Israel and other nations, personal providence, how divine providence works, the system behind divine providence, the influence of the stars, and the details of the divine providence. There's so much preceding what we've read these last couple weeks. Then he gets into the soul, inspiration, prophecy, and the supernatural. And I find these are very interesting insights. But there's hundreds in this section, and we've just finished. And then he talks about what the great redemption is, the visitation, remembrance, and the rectified world, what that that's going to look like. Some beautiful stuff. Maybe we can do these 7 chapters starting on Monday, something small that might give us some interim while I'm waiting for this book called Triumph After All We Want to Get Into by Bina Kozuch. She was recommended by my friend down in North Carolina, and it's just always a joy to have a recommendation and then get a book sent from an actual author. The book was written and published in 2018, and I'm told it's about her mother's actual life experience, so it's based on fact. And I think it might be a refresher. When I spoke to her yesterday and mentioned about she mentioned that there is a International Holocaust Day coming up in November, and she'd love to get on, and maybe we could let's just play it by ear on that. But I may do some interim lessons next week while I'm waiting for this book to arrive, just to give you guys insights. I am scheduled this weekend to still go live on Saturday after Shabbat. Ends in Israel with Pirkei Avos with Rabbi Chaim Kaufman. Always a joy to hear him share. And then after that, we've got and Beyond the Seven with Rabbi Aaron David Poston. We've got the 48 Ways to Wisdom. We're on part 35 this week. Always a new notion about ways to wisdom for us to acquire and integrate into our lives and actually walk in a more God-honoring path. It's a profound course, and they even have that series in this study section. I know there's one in here on Torah.org of the 48 Ways. It's actually under, I think it's in the Maharal section on Pirkei Avos, and it's all on chapter 6 of Pirkei Avos, the 48 Ways to Wisdom. One of the most profound. I think it's taught by Rabbi David Rosenfeld in Jerusalem, and he's a deep scholar and a little more in your face, but does tell it like it really is. Just great stuff. So I've always enjoyed Torah.org website because of the amount of information and PDF, downloadable PDF lessons that are readily available that you can jump in and study everything. We've gone over this already with many of you. There are Psalms, Joshua, Jonah, Maimonides stuff, Ramchal, Midrash. Yeah, plenty and plenty of hundreds, if not thousands, of lessons on there. That is enough to, if you read them all, and I've gone through, I think, virtually everything in their study section over the last 20 years, brings a degree of maturity because you then get a little bit of what Judaism is about and what their message to the remainder of the world is. And this is why I love the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. We can be the righteous of the nations and have a part in the world to come according to the position of the great sages of Israel and Torah and Tanakh. And it's just a joyous opportunity. And this Sunday we'll be back on with Genesis class with Rabbi Chaim Goldberg of the Noahide World Center, whom I appreciate so much, to continue these classes. He's been such a blessing working with Rabbi Uri Shirky, the founder of the Noahide World Center, and they got the Brit Shalom book out in 9 or 11 languages, and their prayer book, Brit Olam, which really helps B'nai Noach to function in ways that give Hashem glory, life-changing and life-fulfilling, folks. A wonderful opportunity. So, I don't want to go on and on and on. I also have my mother, Sheila Etzel, who joins us regularly here on the YouTube. She'll be flying in to visit me next Wednesday. And so I look forward to having her here when we start doing some classes, doing some broadcasts. I miss her, and it's nice to have that visit. And yeah, it's going to be great. And so I do have to take next Wednesday off to pick her up at the airport in the next town over. So, we'll play it by ear for next week. But I do have two broadcasts this Saturday. Once Sabbath ends, once sunset in Israel happens on Saturday. And then, of course, one on Sunday with Rabbi Goldberg. And I did hear from Rabbi Pinhas Levin as well, and he wants to do a series. And we're talking about maybe next Thursday at our usual pleasant and purposeful Torah time, Hashem willing. Um, I know he's been going on and on and on. He's endured a lot of flack from a lot of rabbis for giving anti-vax letters for religious reasons to Noahides, and I'm not on board. I see the things in a different light. I see in my area, my province, which is a vast territory, we see areas where vaccination rates are high, cases have gone down, and areas where vaccinations are low, cases have gone up. And so there's clear markers of effects, but nobody is for the forcing of virus or a vaccine upon people. And you know, uh, in our province, they're pushing a lot where there's not even exceptions. If you're in law enforcement or in the healthcare system, yeah, they're coming out with mandates, and there will not be room for religious exemptions. Um, you either in or you're out, and I know it's offensive to some to even think that governments would be that totalitarian, but I try to flip the coin and say, look, if you've already made your decision, you've got to consider these are repercussions of your decision, not a challenge to your rights. You have the right to make that decision to accept or reject it, okay? But don't claim that the repercussions of your choice is an infringement on your rights. You can get vaccinated or not. I encourage everybody to. We want this virus to end, and the only way that's going to happen is when the cases go down to zero and stay there for an extended period of time. Will it purge it out of your region? And nobody wants to keep it going. I know that they've got some tablets on the horizon, but they're not quite as effective as a vaccine. And there are still arguments over potential other measures that prevent infection, but still, do your research, keep intellectual virtue. I find that when alarmist behavior happens, there's what's the word? There's a mania, and I see too many anti-vaxxers are maniacs for their rights when they're only uh, they're only arguing about the repercussions for their exercised right already. Um, you can't put the cart before the horse. We gotta work together as one to see this virus taken down and stop. I mean, the death toll's got to go down. Last I heard, the U.S. was about 715,000 deaths. That's just such a huge number. Here in Canada, where I am, I mean, it's a lot lower. Of course, we're 1/10 the population, but still, it's too many, and I don't want to hear anymore or argue with the anti-vax side. Like I say, I see too much mania that is unsound and refuses to look at the whole of the matter, being that numbers go down where the vaccinations are up, and the case numbers go up where the vaccinations are low. You can't deny this evidence, and I think what we can take away from the Ramkal is we need Hashem's mazal on the whole of the situation to turn it around. Hashem owns it all, rules the world, and we need to accept the fact that he steers everything, as Ramkal has completely shared with us. Hashem steers everything in his direction for that ultimate point of the revealing of Hashem's complete and utter sovereignty, so that we just all get it, that world to come won't be left in the dark, and nobody wants to be left in the dark. And sometimes it takes trying times for us to come to greater understandings. And heaven forbid anybody I know ever catch this nasty virus or other things. But I hope you're all blessed, that good mazal come down on your lives, and that Hashem's mercy be upon you in all that you do, and that you walk in abundance in this world, and shine as lights, and actually are impactful and making the world a better place. And mania won't get you there, though, and spiritual nuttiness doesn't do it for me either. So always, try to promote intellectual virtue, soundness. Stay sound, stay sane out there, folks. I'll try and be back Monday with some notions. If I get this new book sent from Bina Kozuch, we'll be breaking into that as soon as it arrives. Exciting, but I'll probably end up having to have a few days where we'll come up with something for a few days. But I don't want to do it just for nothing if nobody wants to hear it. So if the numbers are so low, why bother? I'm praying about it myself and trying to see what Hashem would have me do. I know some of you really appreciate it. I haven't saw Ashley G here today from California, or even my friend Zakia down in Lima. I haven't saw anybody online, but it's always a joy to be able to share and even talk Torah. And it's been just wonderful to talk about this book, Da'at Tevunot, The Knowing Heart, by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, known as the Ramkal. Hope you've enjoyed the series. We'll keep it up there on No Hide World Center social media. Don't be afraid to share it. Please write me if you got any suggestions or comments or questions. I'll do all I can. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. This is Dan signing out from Rocky Mountain Readings. Bye for now.